Hello, this is Brian Taman, and I'm going to be using this screencast to share my project for the Digital Citizen Application Activity for the digital self. So, for this ISTE requirement, I chose to focus on the standard Citizen 3B, establish a learning culture that promotes curiosity and critical examination of online resources and fosters digital literacy and media fluency. So, from the choice board, um, I really kind of gravitated to this digital self side here on the left and wanted to focus on curating a list of online resources that could be used in professional development and then sharing with those staff how I chose those resources and what strategies I used so that I could empower them to find resources on their own. And as my role as a tech coach, one thing I wanted to mention is that while I am focusing on using this as like staff development with staff, that I definitely want to model and be very explicit in what I'm doing so that hopefully I can inspire them to do things in their own classroom. I know that that's one of the hard things sometimes when you're a coach is you no longer have a classroom of students where you can, um, you know, do things that you are advocating for because you don't have that daily class of students to work with. So you really have to try to inspire other people. So, um, definitely as I go through this as professional development, I have that idea in the back of my mind, or I have the goal in the back of my mind that I really do want to model this and encourage the teachers to repeat those processes that I'm using with them with their students. So that they're empowering their students, because really ultimately that's the whole reason that we're here is to support the kids and help them meet the ISTE standards. So the topic that I chose to work with for the professional development is one that I spend a lot of time on and is a real passion of mine. That is a huge topic with a lot of elements, and that's blended learning. So I'm going to share some examples of what I've created. So the first example I'm going to share is this blended learning hyperdoc. And I have implemented this workshop a few times, and I plan to implement it again. It's on like a rotating basis when I deliver this at Southwestern. And each time I do it, I learn and revise it and make it a little better or update it. So through this ISTE process, it was another great time to reflect on it and improve and be able to apply a lot of my thinking. So I'm actually sharing this list of resources, which would be right here in this possible learning activities column. All of these are links to to the website. So this is what I've curated. And I tried to use a hyperdoc format, which was it's been a more popular format you've seen at tech conferences and things for the last few years. So I also wanted to model that type of document for sharing links. And I was very explicit about what I thought about as I curated and developed these links. So I tried to ask myself some key questions about blended learning and kind of get to the root of blended learning. And then I made sure that as I asked those questions and I located materials that they spoke to those kind of key questions. And I broke this hyperdoc up into different stages. So the first stage here was dispositions. So as you study blended learning, you start to realize that there's definitely some underlying like culture and values and sort of like underlying beliefs of education that you have to really embrace technology and embrace blended learning and personalized learning. So, for example, do you believe that students have intelligence that is malleable, that if they work at it and put time and energy into it, that they can learn? Or do you believe that students just have a fixed trait and some students are great at learning and other kids aren't? And the ones who aren't, there's no real reason to work with them because that's just sort of their fixed characteristic. Well, I definitely believe, and the research has shown that, intelligence is very malleable. So a lot of these first links here just deal with the idea of growth mindset and reinforce that idea, if they haven't heard it, or maybe they've only heard a few times. So hearing it a few more will help them to realize that that's a disposition that they have to have. So that's how I kind of, I kind of ask key questions to get people thinking. And then using that key question as a filter, I could find some resources that would speak to those key questions and help them to, process it and come to maybe a key disposition that will help them implement this successfully. So then my next step was the what and why of blended learning. So what exactly is it? What are some of the different models? Why would we want to implement this? So again, I listed some key questions that I would use to think about that, and then a bunch of different resources. One thing that we've tried to do at Southwest is develop these consistent presentations. So here's open educational resources. This was actually initially presented by Dr. Hartman, but then I've also used it myself whenever I talk about open ed resources. And the powerful thing about this is we're delivering a consistent message so that when teachers hear about OER from Dr. Hartman at the admin level or from a technology coach, they're getting a consistent presentation and a consistent message about what we feel OERs are, and they're not getting, a bunch of conflicting information. This next one really directly ties to this project. So in stage 2, when you're doing blended learning, one of the first things that you have to do is really curate and create your resources that the students are going to be using online. So, again, I had think abouts, and I kind of emphasize these sections here with the highlighting. So I would have them consider, like, what do all great educational resources share? Like, what are their characteristics? And I have a bunch of examples there for them to look at. And then they can start to realize that even though there's a lot of different formats of videos and types of learning activities, they all have some underlying key characteristics if it's really good and helpful. And then talk a little bit about, does everybody agree that the same video or resource in general is really the best way of learning that topic? Helping them realize that different people learn things in different ways. So providing, a lot of different options for them, not just curating maybe the absolute best resource in their mind, but what would be maybe the top 4 or 5, and then empowering people to then choose maybe from those 3 or 4 which one would be the best fit to them. So maybe one's a little slower, one's a little faster, one has a little more depth and detail, one's a little more holistic. Talking about the length of the videos. When is it good to create your own videos rather than finding professionally produced ones? So just, again, all kinds of key questions and my curated lists that are hopefully going to help them explore those key questions and come to some conclusions. And then stage 3 is my applications. And then stage 4 is refining and persisting. So one of the great things about providing a curated list of resources like this, kind of broken out by levels or stages of implementation, is when teachers come to this workshop. I might have some teachers that are back here on stage 1 trying to figure out what some of the different blended learning models are. And I may have other teachers that show up that have been doing blended learning, and they really need to just sort of refine and persist and, uh, you know, uh, become experts on what they're doing. Because maybe it's going really well, they just need to tweak a little thing here or there. So that's my curated list, and that's, these questions on the left here would definitely be the ones that I would encourage teachers to use as like a filter to curate future assignments. And wanted to share a couple other examples. This is a grad class that I currently teach, and I just finished up this past week. And one of the assignments for this is I want them to find some articles about blended learning, and then they're going to use that to write APA research paper on a blended learning model that they feel is the best for their classroom. And what I really emphasize when I teach this course is that it's great to go to the experts. So I want them to go to ISTE, and they go to the ISTE blog, and we talk about doing a keyword search on the blog and using like the tag cloud to find all of the blog posts that are tagged with flipped learning or personalized learning. And then that helps to narrow in their focus, and then they can start to read and choose articles that speak to them. And we also have them do at least 3 articles so that they are starting to get like a general theme in the research. So obviously, you might read one article or one newsletter, and it might not have the best ideas or the most accurate. But as you read 3 or 4 or 5 articles from different experts, and they all start to tell this similar story, then you have more confidence that that's the correct story. I basically have gone out and shown them ISTE, iNacao, the Blended Learning Universe from the Christensen Institute, Edutopia, the Christian Institute itself. So just taking them out to a number of well-respected um, professional organizations that uh, do a lot of work in the blended learning space. And I just want them to, first of all, be aware of who these expert places are. Make sure that they're aware that they have blogs where they're constantly posting the latest research and information and the latest strategies that they're developing, and making sure that they visit those and get used to, being independent, self-directed learners. Um, So that's another example. As far as having teachers share like their work that they're finding in here, so I often will do a collaborative doc for the courses where I will have all of the different students share things that they're finding. So here's my example for digital citizenship and classroom management, and also like sharing resources, articles, and blogs. So if we scroll down here, you can see that I will have the teachers based on going out to those resources here, these blogs, um, and then talking with them about these key questions about blended learning and kind of keeping these in mind. I want them to go to those expert blog sites and find articles that kind of speak to those key questions, and then they will actually post the links to the article that they found that spoke to them, and then gave a quick summary and then their initials. Um, so that way we can tell, who did it. And if we had like a follow up question, we could go to that person in the class and ask them, uh, and have more like continue the dialogue and the conversation. So I really like doing these collaborative documents um, alongside of a course because it does help facilitate that online collaboration that can sometimes be hard in an asynchronous class that's online. So that's another strategy that I use. And then made a slide here to kind of summarize, uh, I guess, my process. So when I share these curated links on blended learning, I make sure that I talk about these strategies with the teachers, and I tell them again that they should be doing this with their subject area. So if they're a math teacher, they should figure out who are the recognized experts in math, like maybe their professional math teacher association or the National Science Teacher Association. So I want them to identify who are the experts in their area, their content. Where are their blogs? How can you use the keywords and the tags and the filters on the blog to find that information? And then I often try to encourage them to find articles and videos that are part of a series. A librarian once told me, if you have a reluctant reader and you get them hooked on a book, but that's the only book that author ever wrote, then at the end of that book, they kind of have to go into a search mode again of trying to find a good book. Whereas if you can get them hooked on a book that's part of a series, like let's say you get them hooked on the first book of Harry Potter, the great news is when they're done reading the first Harry Potter book, there's like 6 more books. So all of a sudden you can have them reading for a whole year. So I try to apply that lesson with teachers to technology. And as an example, um, we'll talk a lot about technology support, like when you're doing blended learning and kids are using technology. A lot of times teachers feel like they don't have the tech skills that they need to really implement blended learning. So I encourage them to find videos on YouTube that teach the kids how to do things. Like there's no reason to spend an hour creating a video on how to, make a Google slide or how to use Microsoft Excel, because there's tons of videos out there on demand for kids to find. Um, so what I do is not only do we find a video, but then we try to look at the author. In this case, Teachers Tech is a great example that I recommend and use it as a model. If I go to the Teachers Tech video and I click on their playlists, you can see that they have tons of different tech tools. So again, the power here, going back to the book example, is now if let's say I find Teachers Tech because I'm trying to teach the kids Microsoft Word for a project that they're doing, if I can teach the kids Teachers Tech, they can come here, go to the playlist, and in the future, they could be empowered to learn Microsoft Excel or video editing or Windows 10 or GIMP or any of these other tools, Google Classroom, graphics tools. So they just, this guy professionally creates videos for all these different tech tools. So in the future, this is an excellent go-to place for students when they run into, a new tech tool and maybe another class. They know that they could go to Teachers Tech, and there might be a pretty good shot that he has created a series of videos for them on how to use that tool. So it's sort of the idea of teaching them to fish so that they can, teach themselves in the future. So a couple of the others that are good examples that I share is this YouTube site, Technology for Teachers and Students. Same idea. Maybe a teacher for a little mini lesson is trying to teach the kids how to do some stuff in Excel. I would encourage them to link to one of the teacher tech videos on Excel and then make sure that they mention to the kids that this is a go-to resource in this area. And for this particular assignment in this particular class, you're using it to learn Excel. But in the future, you can always come here to learn all different kinds of tech tools. So again, it's empowering the kids to be able to solve their own problems in the future and have some trusted experts to go to in the future. And then here's another example just to kind of drive it home. Anson Alexander does an excellent job. You can see he's got lots of different tutorials from iOS, Amazon Echo, Android, Google. Um, again, so as long as the kids realize that these people are out there, they can go learn what they need when they need it. So I try to encourage teachers to think about that. And there might be like myself, maybe I created a really awesome video on Excel, but that's my only video and I didn't really create any other videos. There's nothing wrong with sharing that with kids, but it can be a little limiting because it's like a one and done experience. Whereas if you can identify some of these people, it can be very empowering. And if they like Anson Alexander's style, or they like the Technology for Teachers and Students style, or they like their teacher's text style. There's 3 different styles of presentation that they could choose, and any one of those 3 has a pretty comprehensive amount of learning and experiences on there. The other thing I had mentioned earlier, just to kind of summarize, I do talk a lot about trying to find multiple resources. Anybody can read an article that might support one point of view or another. So I think encouraging people to find multiple resources so that you start to get like a consistent message or like an underlying theme that starts to develop. I try to encourage that when curating resources. And then also just kind of the nitty gritty of looking at the details, like when you find a resource, is the author's name there? What are their qualifications? What kind of experience do they have? When was it written? So those are some other things that I look at. So that is my project for digital self, and some examples of some of the work that I've done in this ISTE standard.